Hey, this is David Iser from DMXS Radio, and you are about to get roosted in the Motocross Vault.
Hello and welcome back to the Motocross Vault. My name is Tony Blazier, and what this video is going to cover is a look back at Honda's all-new XR650R for 2000. At the time, I think a lot of people, including myself, were anticipating Honda would come out with something to kind of be a direct competitor to the YZ400F and WR400F, but Honda went a completely different direction with this. This was clearly designed to be a replacement for the XR600R and wasn't really going to be playing in the same arena as the 400F. I'm sure in the desert there probably still was some overlap there, but this machine is much larger, heavier, bigger than the 400F, and clearly was designed for a different target market. Honda wanted to keep basically the DNA of the original 600R, which had been a huge hit for them. At the time, I guess maybe the last major redesign was 88, so the bike was pretty long in the tooth, but it was still winning. Guys like Scott Summers were cranking up all kinds of wins in the woods, and then they were riding the XR600Rs to wins in Baja. They were still very competitive, and ironically, the 650L is still in production today. The dual sport version, you really can still buy that original XR600R with an electric starter and some lights if you wanted it. But Honda was looking to have something a little more modern, and in 2000 here, they added liquid cooling, an all-new aluminum chassis. It really is a updated version of the 600R design. Again, I was one of those people that thought they'd be, doing something a little more of a direct competitor to the 400. And when I first saw it, I was kind of shocked at how big the thing was. It's a huge motorcycle. If you've never seen one of these things in person, it looks like it weighs about 500 pounds to look at it, despite the aluminum frame, which was very unique. This does have an aluminum frame, but it's completely different than what they used on the CRs. It's more, I guess, probably closer to what Yamaha did in 2005 with their YZ line, and that it's a more conventional, backbone style frame just made of aluminum. Ironically, the bike is not lighter. It's actually heavier than the old 600, despite having an aluminum frame and all the other stuff they did to it, adding the liquid cooling and all this other stuff, and still no electric start. The bike was still heavy. It was a big machine, but it was very capable in its element. The motor was very reliable. They were excellent in the woods, excellent in the desert, and a lot of people raced them to victory on the track. They were really fun machines, but I don't think they ever caught on to the same extent that the original 600 did, and certainly not to the CRF's extent. When they finally came out with a CRF in 2005, that kind of signaled a death knell for this 650R. It had a pretty short run, especially considering how long the 600R was in production. The 650 was retired pretty quickly, so I don't think Honda probably ever saw the number of sales that they were maybe hoping for on the machine, but it's certainly a unique machine of the early 2000s and kind of a little snapshot of really a bygone era four-stroke design that Honda had going on in the early 2000s. If you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the other videos I've done. I have retrospectives of all kinds of off-road and motocross machines, even some ATVs on my channel. I do shootouts, retrospectives on the history of bikes, how they changed over time. I even have a history of motocross if you'd like to check that out on my channel. It's available if you'd like to learn a little bit about the history of the sport and some of the machines that shaped it. If you'd like to support what I do have Motocross Vault merch available on my Teespring store. I will include a link here in the description. There are all kinds of designs for different off-road and motocross machines available. And if you have something custom in mind you'd like to do, I can put your name or number on the back of the shirt. I can put your number on the bike in a truck or whatever you want. Just kind of let me know what you're looking for. I'm happy to see if I can come up with something for you to meet your needs. So here, without further ado, is a look back at Honda's 2000 XR650R. In 2000, Honda set about replacing one of the most successful and iconic off-road machines of all time. Originally introduced in 1979 as the XR500, Honda's big bore four-stroke quickly became the preferred machine of desert rats and off-road four-stroke enthusiasts. The big XRs were heavy and often under-suspended, but their endless mountains of torque and rugged simplicity proved to be the perfect basis for turning a big bore plaything into a lethally effective desert racer. Modified XRs could be found snaking through the woods, bombing across the desert, and even roosting around the occasional motocross track. Upgraded to 591cc in 1985, the newly christened XR600R became the Japanese four-stroke to beat in the mid-80s. By 1988, Yamaha had retired their TT600, and Suzuki's DR500 was a distant memory. Big four-strokes from KTM and Husqvarna persisted, but their liquid cooling, more sophisticated suspension, and higher price points seemed aimed at a different clientele than the Do-It-All XR. Despite its relative lack of sophistication, however, the air-cooled XR proved to be an incredibly capable racer. During its 21-year run, the big XRs captured 9 Baja 1000 titles, 5 Grand National Cross Country Championships, 4 Hare Scrambles titles, and even the occasional World 4-Stroke Motocross title with riders like Ron Lachine and Johnny O'Mara at the controls. Big, burly, and bulletproof, the XR600R was the ultimate everyman racer of the 80s and early 90s. With this illustrious resume as a backdrop, Honda set about replacing its iconic thumper with an all-new machine in 2000. 2 years prior, Yamaha reignited 4-stroke enthusiasm with the introduction of the amazing YZ400F motocrosser and its off-road focused cousin, the WR400F. The YZ and WR were unlike any previous Japanese 4-strokes, with high-tech, short-stroke motors, dual overhead cams, and road race-inspired 5-valve Genesis heads. Their quick-revving, short-stroke architecture gave them power characteristics that were the polar opposite of the torquey and slow-revving XRs. The Yamaha spooled up quickly and revved to the moon, with seamless power deliveries and an utter lack of the XR's chug. With the tremendous success of the new Yamaha 4-strokes, some people hoped that the all-new XRs would be Honda's answer to the WR400F, but Honda's engineers had a different mission in mind. The new XR was developed purely as a replacement for the more than decade-old XR600R. This meant a focus on durability and comfort over outright power and performance. While the new XR would surely do battle with the WRF in some arenas, its much larger displacement and more traditional motor design meant the two were aimed at very different consumers. With the motor design for the all-new Super XR, Honda's engineers took a far more conservative approach than Yamaha had with the YZ and WR. The new motor's 100mm by 82.6mm bore and stroke were very similar to the outgoing 600R. Both motors relied on a 4-valve head, but the new design finally retired the radial 4-valve combustion chamber configuration in use on the XR since 1983. Honda had long felt the reliability of air cooling outweighed the performance gains of liquid cooling on their XRs, but the new 650 finally broke that tradition by offering dual radiators to keep the big singles temps under control. Large 37mm intake valves and 32mm exhaust valves helped the big 649cc mill inhale and exhale effectively. The new top end featured Nickel coating on the cylinder for optimal cooling and durability, and retained the dry sump oil design of the previous generation. A counterbalancer was added to quell vibration from the big single, and a new Husaberg-style reed valve was added to the crankcase to help circulate engine oil through the gearbox. The new motor separated the engine oil from the ignition rotor to reduce drag, and added an automatic cam chain tensioner to simplify maintenance. The redesigned motor dropped 10 pounds from the old XR mill, but still clocked in at a hefty 88 pounds dry. Today, electric starting would be expected, but in 2000, kicking was still the status quo, so the new XR made do without the push-button start found on the XR650L Dual Sport. The big 650 required a hefty kick to spin its coffee can-sized piston, but it did feature primary kickstarting to allow starting in any gear, and an automatic compression release for convenience. A large 40mm piston valve carburetor fed fuel to the beast and featured special low-friction coating that Honda claimed reduced throttle effort by a full 22%. As before, a wide ratio 5-speed gearbox and manual clutch put the XR's substantial torque to the ground. A new removable clutch cover was crafted out of magnesium to save weight and offered easy access to the clutch for the first time. A large set of stainless steel headers funneled exhaust to a massive single steel muffler, which was equipped with a US-approved spark arrestor to keep sound down and appease Uncle Sam. While the XR's new motor was far from groundbreaking, its redesigned chassis was state-of-the-art. In 1997, Honda had introduced the industry's first production alloy motocross chassis on their all-new CR250R. The twin-spar aluminum frame was super trick, but also super stiff, and many felt the old steel frame was a better performer. With the XR650R, Honda took a very different approach to its frame design. With its hefty 287-pound weight and big power, Honda still felt aluminum was the right choice for the frame, but the new chassis was designed to be more compliant than the ultra-rigid first-generation CR chassis. Honda knew the new frame would need to be stout to combat flex, but comfort was key to a machine designed to be ridden 1,000 miles across the Baja Peninsula. Unlike the CR's twin-spar frame, the new XR maintained a more traditional single-backbone construction. This was done to dial in the best balance of strength and comfort, reduce chassis width, and allow the most available fuel capacity. Like the previous XR600 and Yamaha's WR400F, the new frame featured an internal oil tank to increase oil capacity and keep the temps down. The main frame backbone was built in a convex shape to increase strength, while the swing arm pivot was built around pressure-formed alloy plates that employed the engine cases for additional support. The swing arm, Pro-Link linkage, and detachable subframe were all crafted out of aluminum, with the top shock mount being integral to the frame's design. The new frame offered slightly more rake and trail than the old XR chassis and featured a 1-inch increase in wheelbase. Interestingly, Honda also decided to clear coat the frame despite its aluminum construction. On the suspension front, the XR once again showed its bias towards comfort over control. Unlike the WR400F, which featured the very latest in motocross spec suspension, the XR650R chose to rely on older and more off-road focused technology. Up front, the new XR featured a 46mm conventional cartridge fork, which was very similar to the ones that graced Kawasaki's KX line a decade before. The new fork was 3mm larger in diameter than the outgoing design and featured 41mm less underhang below the front axle. The fork's internal cartridge was 5mm larger in capacity and offered greater adjustability by adding rebound to the previous design's adjustable compression settings. While larger in diameter, the new fork did offer 0.4 inches less travel than the old Showa design. In the rear, the XR featured an all-new Kiaba piggyback shock with a 2mm larger shock shaft and 27mm more shaft travel. When paired with the all-new Pro-Link linkage, this translated to 12.1 inches of rear-wheel travel. This was a 1.1-inch increase over the previous design. As before, the rear damper offered external adjustments for spring preload, compression, and rebound damping. All new bodywork graced the XR650R with a redesigned pilot's compartment and updated styling. While the new machine looked quite large, the updated ergonomics were significantly slimmer than the old XR600R. The large seat was considerably more comfortable than the thin motocross-style perch found on the WR400F, and the tank featured the same 2.6 gallons of fuel capacity as the old XR with a noticeably thinner feel. Large side plates made it easy to affix numbers, and a slick, easy-access airbox featured a trick flat air filter that was designed to allow for spares to be easily carried in a fanny pack. Lights were standard front and rear, with the XR's ignition allowing for a more powerful light setup if needed. New 240mm discs were added front and rear, with the front featuring a CR250R master cylinder to assure maximum power and excellent feel. A standard O-ring chain, quality components, and a 6-month warranty filled out the XR's impressive list of features for 2000. On the trail, the all-new XR turned out to be exactly what most XR600R fans had wanted. Power was super smooth, with tons of grunt and none of the stalling and hiccuping that drove Yamaha 4-stroke converts crazy. Power delivery was closer to KTM's churning 520SX than Yamaha's fire-breathing YZ426F, with a very smooth crescendo of power that built up slowly as you twisted the throttle. There was no sudden hit or explosive blast of thrust, just a mountain of torque available at the twist of your wrist. Where Yamaha's YZ426F revved quickly, hit hard, and pulled to the moon, the more leisurely XR took its time, hunted for traction, and then rocketed forward. It was significantly faster than the old 600R, but not as potent as Husaberg's 600, KTM's 520SX, or the YZ426F. In stock condition, the XR was jetted lean, choked off, and muffled down. Stock gearing was tall as well, with a top speed just shy of 100 miles per hour. Thankfully, however, there was a lot more power to be found in Honda's Big Red Desert Sled. In stock form, the XR's 42mm intake manifold had an insert installed that reduced its size to 20.8mm. The stock muffler's 40mm core was also choked down to a tiny 20mm in size. These changes made the EPA happy and kept the XR quiet, but limited its maximum performance. Knowing that many buyers wanted more than a big trail bike, however, Honda offered a factory power-up kit that opened up the intake and exhaust. Once this was done and the bike was rejetted, the XR was louder but significantly more potent. The basic XR personality remained, but there was more juice on tap when needed. The bike was fast enough to race motocross, hare and hound, or in the woods. Engine braking was less noticeable than on the old XR, but the big 650 remained more traditional in its feel than Yamaha's thumpers. Vibration was virtually non-existent, and the motor was as pleasant and easy to ride as any massive 4-stroke single could hope to be. Riders with large feet found the stock shifter a bit too short, but most riders praised the XR's light clutch and excellent shifting feel. The transmission featured widely spaced gears, but the motor's prodigious torque made that mostly a non-issue. Geared up for Baja or down for Glen Helen, and the XR's flexible motor was equally at home. On a motocross track, most riders could just leave it in third and ride the whole track like it was a 1-speed. Fast, fun, and stone reliable, the XR's 649cc single overhead cam mill was just the motor upgrade XR enthusiasts had been asking for. On the chassis front, the new XR was equally impressive. Big weight and big power don't often add up to off-road excellence, but in the case of the all-new XR650R, Honda mostly subverted that expectation. At a Honda claimed 277 pounds, the new 650R was 6 pounds heavier than the old 600, but the stouter chassis, less flexy suspension, peppier power, and slimmer ergonomics made the new machine actually feel lighter. Turning was surprisingly good for such a large machine, and the XR generally went exactly where it was pointed. There was noticeably more flex to the 46mm conventional forks than with its inverted competition, but it did not seem to adversely affect the machine's turning. The combination of the soft suspension, heavy motor, strong engine braking, and aggressive geometry delivered a front end that stuck to the terra firma like glue. No one was going to mistake the 650R for an RM125, but it was more agile than any 300-pound machine had a right to be. Perhaps most surprising was the fact that the XR's steering agility did not seem to hinder its high-speed stability. Fittingly, for a machine designed to do 100 miles an hour across the desert, the big red machine was a bullet train once in motion. There was not even a hint of headshake, and it took an act of Congress to knock the 650 off its line once it built up a head of steam. Jumping the XR was easy, but you did feel its weight and the gyroscopic effect of that big crank if you tried to make any sort of correction in the air. Big whips and wicked turndowns were not in the XR's repertoire in 2000. Motocross tracks were not its natural environment, but as long as you did not cross-rut or come up short, jumping the XR was a drama-free experience. For most riders, the only concern when jumping the XR was its rather softly tuned suspension. The forks and shock were set up stiff enough to handle high-speed sand whoops and the occasional natural jump, but big air was not in their intended purpose. At slow speeds, they were super plush, and riders praised their performance off-road. The forks and shock were supple enough to absorb rocks and roots, while still offering enough firmness to keep the bike under control at speed. Big whoops and high-speed sand washes pushed the outer limits of the stock springs and damping, but they never did anything weird or bottomed harshly. If you did intend to do a little cross-training on a motocross track, then stiffer springs were a good investment, but overall, the XR stock suspension was excellent for its intended use. On the detailing front, the all-new XR was at the top of its class with only a few small gripes. Unlike some previous XRs, the Kickstarter stayed where it was supposed to and did not try to flop out constantly. The lack of an electric starter was a bummer, but at least the Honda was an easy starter. There was none of the YZWR's annoying starting drill, and all it took was a strong and smooth kick to get the XR humming. The grips, levers, throttle, and clutch were excellent in quality and feel. The bike was well thought out and easy to work on, with a uniform bolt selection and high-quality fasteners throughout. The clutch offered a light pull and generally stood up to abuse well. The filter was easy to access and a piece of cake to clean or change. The brakes worked excellently with great power, superb feel, and trouble-free operation. In stock condition, the motor was absolutely bulletproof, and many XR650Rs went well over the 30,000 mile mark without any major rebuilds. With the 650R in many markets outside the US being legal for the street, it was clear that Honda designed the motor to last. The 650 seat was less of a couch than the old 600s, but riders still rated it above all the Honda's competition in comfort. The new ergonomics were much better for standing, but older XR pilots found it took a bit of getting used to the more modern layout. With nearly 50 horsepower on tap, the big XR was plenty powerful, even in stock condition, but its super smooth delivery and tremendously wide power band made it about the easiest to ride 50 horsepower machine in existence. As long as you were tall enough to climb on and strong enough to muscle its 300 pounds, the XR was a piece of cake to control. First up, on the demerit side, had to be the bike's weight, which was an issue regardless of how well it hit its tonnage. The XR was almost 30 pounds heavier than a WR426, a machine already well known for its hefty proportions. Even more disappointing was the fact that the new machine was heavier than the old XR, despite the new bike's aluminum frame and lack of an electric starter. The 650R was well-mannered for such a big bike, but if things got out of sorts, there was no denying Sir Isaac Newton and his three laws of motion. Ditching the massive stock exhaust and EPA froof helped, but the bike was going to remain heavy unless you were willing to throw cubic dollars at it for tie parts and accessories. One of those upgrades was likely to be the pegs, which were disappointingly small and narrow for an all-new machine. Upgrading to a titanium IMS alternative shaved 2 ounces and provided good insurance for your ankles. The stock steel bars were also an item crying to be upgraded to improve strength and shave a few ounces. The stock graphics were very attractive, but they were easily damaged by knee braces. Aside from its weight and these small quibbles, however, the XR was a well thought out and very well finished machine. In the end, Honda ended up making exactly the machine they had set out to create. Many riders had hoped Honda would deliver a competitor to the YZ and WR, but Big Red had other plans for their new Super XR. Honda designed the 650R to conquer Baja, and that's precisely what it would do. They never envisioned it as a motocross machine, despite the temptation to take it to the track. Reliability, ease of service, and comfort were just as important as outright performance in the crafting of the 2000 XR650R. In 2005, Honda enthusiasts would finally get the true competitor to the Yamaha thumpers in the form of the all-new CRF 450X. Eventually, slowing sales and the CRF would push the 650R into retirement. Over its 7-year run, the 650 enjoyed a loyal following, but that fan base never brought the XR the type of success enjoyed by the sexier CRF. Honda's last true XR rode off into the desert in 2007, signaling the end of one of the most storied lines of machines in the sport's history. So there you have it. That's a look back at the 2000 XR650R, a machine that certainly was very successful at its intended use. It was a very, very competitive machine in the desert. Johnny Campbell and the Honda team had a lot of success on this machine. It wasn't much of a motocrosser, but that wasn't its intended use. You know, I think a lot of people still try to ride it. Like a lot of guys have thrown these XRs on tracks, and they're pretty fun to ride. I never got to ride the 650. I had a 650 L dual sport, and I've ridden the XRs quite a bit. And they're big, fun machines. They're always a little too big and heavy for my taste, but I think in their intended element, they were a lot of fun. And this certainly was a bulletproof machine that a lot of people still love to this day. If you like this sort of thing, make sure you check out some of the other videos I've done. If you have something in mind you'd like to see me do in the future, let me know. I'd like to do a little more of these videos, but like I said, work's taking up a whole lot of my time of late, so it's a little tough to find the time to do this, but I'll try and crank them out as much as I have time for. So until we meet again, this is Tony Blazier for the Motocross Vault. Keep the rubber side down. Peace.